the project that you led was Age of Apocalypse. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say that was what I would say is that was the first event. And then eventually Fabian wandered off to do other things. And then the events like Operation Zero Tolerance, that was all me. And, like once Fabian was on, there are things that I did, certainly, Born, Onslaught. But until Age of Apocalypse, that was the first time where you actually saw my fingerprints all over a story.
I see, I see, I see. Because obviously, this is a story from the bullpen, straight out of the bullpen. And this is something really valuable for us to know. And to each and every one of you who was maybe trying to recollect which Generation X issue Mr. Scott Lobdell is talking about, this is the one, the chromium cover. I still have it in mint condition with me. And the prelude to the Generation X #1, the Phalanx Covenant. My God, I just loved it. I mean, it's a bit difficult for me to accept new superheroes who don't have much of a history other than the fact that, like, for example, we had Cannonball's sister being part of Generation X or something like that. But the way they were built up in this Phalanx crossover event, I mean, to this day, it remains one of my most favorite of what you and your team were able to accomplish. But I want to ask you that if you can, you have clarified one very important bit, and I want to discuss some more things about Age of Apocalypse and Onslaught that came after. But before I go into that, I actually want you to share some interesting things that happened during the 30th anniversary of X-Men. Because this was not a small feat on its own. And the amount of stories that were published, and especially when I talk about your story, which started from X-Men number 300, when we came across the fact that Illyana Rasputin is dying of the legacy virus. And then her funeral takes place in X-Men 304. And Magneto exploits that situation to his advantage, the betrayal and all that. I mean, there is so much drama, but relatable drama that's happening there. I mean, take us through that phase of your life.
I think that to me, the X-Men, I remember reading Uncanny, the circus issue, where, Banshee is being a carnival barker on the cover, and, you see Nightcrawler as a trapeze artist, and what's his name, Colossus as this strong guy. And that issue, you went in, and all of a sudden, like, the X-Men were prisoners of Magneto, and then they escaped and they fell to Earth, and they were in the Savage Land, and then they were in Japan, and then they went to Canada and met Alpha Play. It was like, like that spate of issues there was just like kaboom, 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 kaboom. It was, and at the time it was Chris and John, and they were firing on, all 8 cylinders. They were just like, you were always, always, always surprised. The next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And I think what we wanted to do was, like over the years, and this is no slam against Chris, is over the years you have your favorites, so you don't want to do anything to them, so your team just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger because you don't want to write anybody out,
Right.
and if you don't want to write anybody out, then you don't really want anything to happen to them. You just want them to be, on the shelf for whenever you need them.
Right.
And so when we got there, we talked about the fact, like, that was a really exciting time when you would open up the next issue and you had no idea what was just about to slam you in the face. And I think that that's what we tried to go back and recapture. Fabian will tell you this. I'm not trying to say anything disparaging, but Fabian and I had 2 entirely different ways of approaching our X-Men work. If you sat down with Fabian, he could tell you what happens for the next 5 years. He'd have a chart and he'd be like, well, Betsy's going to do this, and then she's going to become this character, and Wolverine's going to do that. And he had it all plotted out for like years ahead of time. I would sit down and they'd be like, oh my God, that was so cool. What happened at the end of that issue? That was amazing. So what happens next? I go, oh no, I'll tell you as soon as I sit down to write it. They're like, and Fabian be like, come on, you can't write that way. And I go, if I can surprise myself, then I can surprise the audience, And so that was how I thought of things. And it would drive Fabian right up the wall because he was like, you plan it. I go, you can plan what you're having for dinner that night, but you don't know if your taxi cab is going to hit a horse in the park and suddenly you can't make it to the restaurant. And then you're arrested as a witness to this accident. And you don't know. All you have is your basic idea. I'm going to dinner tonight with my friends. You don't know what's going to happen. You know there's going to be a bar fight. Somebody's going to get hurt. And so in that way, you just don't know. And that's what a lot of my writing came from. And I will tell you something to disappoint you. You're going to be very sad, but I'm going to tell you the truth because we're friends now. You referenced Magneto, Wolverine shutting down Magneto's mind.
Professor Xavier. Professor Xavier.
Professor X shutting down Magneto's mind.
Yes.
How later on it was interesting because then you saw that they were trapped in Xavier's mind, that he didn't shut it down as much as he took Magneto's brain into his own, like his mind into his own. But what happens is if you look at it from your point of view, that was pretty ambitious that from the time he got pulled into Magneto's pulled into Charles's mind all the way up to Onslaught.
Yes.
You look, holy shit, that is some planning. That's like John Hickman level planning. That took years to get the story told. That was amazing. But the truth is that none of that is actually real in the sense, like, I'll give you an example.
Sure.
Is after Age of Apocalypse, we all sat around and we said, Bob and the editors were like, okay, this was kind of a big chore and you guys all did good. So if you could do one story, what would you do? And Warren Ellis is like, well, I know what I want to do, but they won't let me do it. And it's like, well, what is it? And he goes, I want Excalibur to sit around a bar and just get drunk. And it's
Okay.
like, go ahead, go do that. So then it came my turn, and I said, I want to have the X-Men sitting around, and there's this like loud whistling sound, and boom, and they run out, and there's Juggernaut, and he skid like 5 miles, and he's slammed into a tree. And the X-Men run up and they go, what happened? He just says, Onslaught. They're at the table. They go, oh my God, that's okay. That's really cool. You have to do that. Who's Onslaught? I know, I have no idea, but I just think it would be so cool. Like, somebody beat up Juggernaut. How cool is that? And they're like, okay, if that's what you're going to do. So I did that issue. And then about a month after it came out, one of the editors went to Bob and said, hey, you had somebody beat up Juggernaut. He's like one of the strongest characters we have. And then it just says Onslaught. Like, you can't do that. You have to explain who Onslaught is.
Right.
Goes, oh, okay. So he went to me and he said, Scott, yeah, the other editors are complaining. You have to explain who Onslaught is. I go, nah. I said, I don't really. I said, I don't know who he is and I don't really care. Like maybe today, we might need him for something. But other than that, I'm not, I don't have any interest in who Onslaught is. So a few months go by and they start to talk about Heroes Reborn and how there has to be like these two separate universes.
Right.
And we kept going back and forth, like who could the villain could separate the Avengers and the X-Men into two different universes. And we're like, well, it's not Kingpin, it's not Dr. Octopus. It's not Dr. Doom because he had just been used for something. It wasn't Apocalypse. It wasn't. And all of a sudden I'm at home one day and I'm like, oh my God. And I came into the office. I go, Onslaught could do it. And they go, how do you know Onslaught could do it? I go, because he beat up Juggernaut. He's got, how powerful is this guy? So they're like, well, okay, well, who is Onslaught? And I was like, well, presumably he's making the Avengers go away. So he's focusing on the X-Men. So it should be X-Men driving the story. And then I forget how, but I think Wade was on the book. Mark Wade was on the book for a while, and we were plotting out who Onslaught was. And then, well, what if Onslaught is the two of them combined? And go, well, when did that happen? Like, how could they be combined? And then it's like, oh, that time ago, when Xavier shut down Magneto, he
Yeah.
didn't shut him down inside, and he's been corrupted this whole time. Like, he thinks he's saving Magneto when Magneto is really corrupting Xavier, and the two of them have formed this character who is Onslaught. Who's unstoppable. The two most powerful mutants in all of comic books have become this singular entity. So then it's like, okay, well, if you think about it, when was the first time Onslaught was mentioned? It was when Juggernaut got beat up. And who's Juggernaut? Is Xavier's stepbrother who tormented him. So if Onslaught was going to lash out at anybody, who's the first person he would lash out on? Well, 6 months, a year later, it turned out it was
Xavier all along.
Yeah, well, it turned out that it was Juggernaut was lashed out at by Magneto. I mean, by Xavier. So again, you look at it and you go, oh my God, that is some class A Hickman laying down all the seeds and going back and picking them up later. But that was really just me and how my brain worked. Like I was always throwing things out, going, oh, that's interesting. I'll just leave that there and I'll come and get it later. And so there was no, when you say like what the plan was for the 30th issue or 30th anniversary,
Yeah.
I'd have to say very little planning as much as there was taking advantage of what was there, So, but and Fabian will tell you that that's insane and the most batshit way to work, but it worked for me. I will tell you a funny story. Just so you know, Fabian's name is pronounced so Nicieza.
Nicieza.
So the way that he would tell people is it was knee, and he'd point to his knee. So Nicieza. That's how he would. So he and I went to this X-Men wedding event in Washington, D.C., where they held a wedding for Scott and Jean.
Right.
And we were there and we're signing the books and stuff. And so Cyclops has to introduce us at one point. So he comes up to me and he goes, hey, I'm really embarrassed, but how do you say Fabian's last name? And Fabian always got mad and he would always say, Nicieza, Nicieza. It's not hard, Nicieza. So I said to Cyclops, I said, oh, it's pronounced knee cheese, like knee and like eating cheese. And he goes, oh, okay. So he walks off. And just before he's about to introduce him, Fabian comes running up and he has Cyclops by the arm. And he goes, what did you tell him? I said, oh, I told him your name is pronounced Nicieza. He goes, he said you said knee cheese. I go, why would I say knee cheese? No, it's Nicieza. The guy goes, okay. Fabian goes, yeah, it's Nicieza. So the guy goes up to introduce, and there's like 500, 600 people there. And he goes, ladies and gentlemen, we have two very special guests today. We have Scott Lobdell, Fabian knee cheese. Fabian comes up on stage. He goes, it's Nicieza. So, but the poor Cyclops was so like flustered. He say knee cheese, but that was what was in his head.
Watch the full episode or listen to it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.